My name is Ingrid Ickes, and I was 34 the year my family let me almost die alone. 31 days in the ICU, 21 of them on a ventilator, with a machine doing the one job my body wouldn't do. When I was finally awake enough to ask for the visitor log, a nurse printed it out and handed it to me without a word. One name, written 31 times. It wasn't my mother. It wasn't my father. It wasn't my brother. It was the man who runs my job sites. A month after I got home, my mother texted me. She didn't ask how I was walking. She asked me to sign my property over to my brother, and she used the word today. So I sent her a picture of a $19 toy tent, and then I blocked her number. I thought that was the end of it. It was 11:40 in the morning. A few hours later, my insurance agent called me, and that phone call is where this story actually starts. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge. This is the channel for the quiet ones, the people who kept the receipts, kept their voices down, and waited for the room to fill up before they said anything at all. If that's you, or if that's somebody you love, you're going to want to stay for this one. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. I came all the way back on April 3rd. Not gently. My throat felt like somebody had dragged a rasp down it, because for 3 weeks something had been living in there, and the nurse who pulled it out told me my voice would sound like gravel for a month, and she was right. Her name was Junie Kohler. She was 38, and she had a way of telling you terrible things in the same tone you'd use to read a grocery list, which I appreciated more than I could say at the time. She told me the numbers. 22 feet. A scaffold anchor that let go on the Dunlap job. Fractured pelvis, punctured lung, and then sepsis, which is the part that nearly finished it. 21 days sedated, 31 days in that unit. I lay there and did the math with a brain that was still half asleep, and then I asked her for the visitor log, because patients can ask for that, and because I already knew, and I wanted to see it in print. She came back with 2 sheets. 31 lines. One name on every line. Odell Bray, my foreman, 55 years old, who had a wife and a bad hip, and a crew to run. He was asleep in the plastic chair by the window when I read it, still in his work boots, with dried mud on them from a site he'd been on 11 hours earlier. I looked at his boots for a long time. Then I asked Junie the only question I had left. Did anybody call? She looked at the chart. Then she looked at the window. She took long enough that I stopped needing the answer. Here's what the house is, so you understand what she was asking for. My grandmother Hazel owned 6 acres on Hazel Run Road, which is not named after her. It's the other way around in the sense that nobody remembers which came first. She died in 2015. I was 23. In 2016, my father sold every one of those acres for $38,000 to close a hole my brother had dug, and he didn't tell me until it was recorded and done. I found out from the tax notice. 3 years later, a piece of it came up at the county tax sale because the buyer never paid the bill, and I stood in the back of that room with $27,400 I had saved over 7 years, driving a truck with a bad clutch, and I bought back 3 1/10 acres of my grandmother's ground. Then I built a house on it. Not hired. Built. Weekends, mostly, and the dead weeks in February when nobody's framing anything. It took 4 years. I dug the footers, I set the sill plate, I hung every door in that place, and there is one apple tree still standing near the middle of the yard because it was Hazel's, and I framed the whole driveway around it rather than take it out. And because of what my father did in 2016, I did one more thing in 2019. Cambria County runs a free service where they mail you a postcard anytime a document gets recorded against your parcel. I signed up the same week I got the deed. Took me 9 minutes. It worked exactly the way it was supposed to work. That's the part that still gets me. They moved me to inpatient rehab on April 3rd and kept me until the 1st of May. 4 weeks of learning to walk again with a rolling frame and a physical therapist named Court, who counted my steps out loud like a man calling a boxing match. It is a strange thing to be 34 and have somebody clap because you crossed a hallway. My mother's first message came on the 9th day I was awake. 2 lines asking how I was feeling, then 4 paragraphs about my brother, Tessa's due in August, and they're paying $1,100 a month for a place with black mold in the bathroom, and Kaylin hasn't slept. And honestly, nobody in this family has slept. Ingrid. I read it twice, and I put the phone face down on the blanket. And I thought about the shop class. When I was 17, I wanted to take advanced woodworking, and my father said no, absolutely not. Girls don't come home with their fingers in a bag. So my mother took the waiver form and signed my name on the parent line, and my name on the student line, both, and handed it to me in the driveway, with a look I have never forgotten. Proud. That's the word. She told that story at Thanksgiving for years. She told it the way other mothers tell about coaching a team. I have been signing your name since you were 17, honey, and look how you turned out. Back then, I thought that was love. I want to be fair to the version of me lying in that bed. She still thought it was love, too. Odell drove me home on May 1st because I couldn't work a clutch and wouldn't have been legal to try. I came up my own driveway on forearm crutches, past Hazel's apple tree, and I stopped at the bottom step because there were 3 pairs of shoes on my porch that were not mine. Not neatly set aside either. Kicked off. The way you do at a place you've been to more than once. Inside, the air was wrong. Not bad, just wrong. The way a house smells when other people have been breathing in it. There was a coffee ring on my kitchen island. There was a sticky note on my refrigerator in handwriting I didn't recognize that said kitchen paint, with 2 question marks. And in my bedroom, on the window casing, I milled myself out of a poplar log. Somebody had run a strip of blue painter's tape across the frame and written on it in pencil, 84 by 63. And then a letter, T. I stood there on my crutches, looking at that piece of tape, and I want to tell you I felt rage. But that isn't what happened. What happened was I got very calm and very slow, and I took my phone out and I photographed it. Then the shoes. Then the note. Then the coffee ring. 14 photographs before I sat down. That's not courage. That's just what 12 years of contracting does to a person. You document first. You ask after. Somebody had measured my bedroom windows for curtains while a machine was breathing for me, and they hadn't even taken the tape down. She came on the 3rd with a casserole, 6.4 miles from Sycamore Street to my porch, and it had taken her 61 days to drive it. She hugged me around the crutches, which is an awkward thing to do, and then she stood in my living room and looked at the ceiling instead of at me. She did not ask about the pelvis. She did not ask about the ventilator. She did not ask what a rolling frame is. She asked how many bedrooms. I told her she knew how many bedrooms she'd been in the house. She said the baby's due the last week of August and Tessa's already 6 months along, which is how I learned who T was, standing in my own bedroom doorway with a piece of blue tape still stuck to my window casing. I asked her the question then. I asked it plain. No heat in it. Mom, why didn't anybody come? And she looked at the ceiling some more and she said, we're not the kind of people who sit in hallways. Then she picked up her purse. And in the doorway, with the casserole still warm on my counter, my mother turned around and said the sentence that I will be hearing when I'm 80 years old. Kaylin needs a home. You just need a roof. She wasn't cruel about it. That's the thing I can't get across. She said it the way you'd read off a shopping list. Then she said everyone was asking what I was going to do for him, and she didn't have an answer for them. I didn't answer her either. I looked out the window at Hazel's apple tree until I heard her car. I run a construction company, which means I have looked up more liens than most attorneys. It's not detective work. It's a Tuesday. You type a name into the county's public records portal, and you find out whether the man who wants 40% up front has 3 judgments against him, and then you decide how you feel about that. So on the 4th of May, I sat at my own kitchen island with my leg propped on a stool, and I typed in my brother's name. Kaylin D. Ickes, 30 years old. 2 civil judgments, $84,000 total. An active wage garnishment at 15%, running since November. His roofing company had gone under in 2023 and taken a leased boom lift and 2 suppliers with it. I already knew most of that in outline. What I didn't know was the line underneath. On the equipment note from 2021, There was a second name. Guarantor. Rosalind M. Ickes. My mother had signed a personal guarantee on my brother's business debt. I sat with that for a while, and the whole shape of my family rearranged itself in my head, like a wall you thought was decorative until you open it up and find it's carrying the roof. Nobody in my family wanted to help Kalen. They wanted to get out from under him. He wasn't the favorite. He was the hole they'd all signed their names next to, and I was the only one left standing on ground that wasn't already spoken for. The portal doesn't show you guarantee amounts. It just shows you that somebody put their whole life behind somebody else's promise. I wanted to know how much. It would be 17 more days before I found out. May 6th, 8:12 in the morning. I was on the porch with coffee and my leg up on a milk crate, watching a woodpecker work over a dead limb on Hazel's tree and wondering whether I should take the limb before it took the tree. The phone buzzed against the arm of the chair. Kalen needs a home for his new family. We need you to sign your property over to him today. I read it maybe 9 times. It's a short message. It didn't take 9 times. What I kept going back to was the last word. Today. Not soon. Not sometime. Not, can we talk about it? Today, like it was a delivery window. Like I was a scheduling problem. 61 days earlier, I had been on a ventilator 31 miles from her kitchen and she had not driven it once, and now the calendar mattered. I sat there for 11 minutes. I did not type anything. There wasn't a sentence in me that would have survived the trip. So instead, I did the only thing that felt honest. I opened a shopping app, and I typed in the word tent, and I scrolled past the real ones, the 8-person ones, the ones with rain flies and aluminum poles, until I got down to a children's play tent in the shape of a castle. Polyester. $19. Ships in 2 days. 4.2 stars. I screenshotted it. I sent it. And then I blocked her number. Then my father's. Then my brother's. Took about 40 seconds for the whole family. I finished my coffee. I thought that was the end of it. It was 11:40. My phone rang again at 2:04. The name on the screen was Keystone Mutual, which is who insures the house, and I answered it because in my line of work when the insurance company calls, you pick up. Her name was Marilyn, and she was apologetic in the specific way of a person who has already lost the argument on your behalf. She said the homeowner's policy on 41 Hazel Run Road was being voided, not canceled going forward. Voided. Back to the start of the term, premium refunded. I asked her why. She said the word underwriting. And then she said the phrase that took the floor out from under my kitchen. Insurable interest. She said when the claim on the water heater came through in April, the carrier ran title, the way they do, and I no longer appear as the owner of record. I said that's not possible. I said it in a completely normal voice. Marilyn, I've owned that parcel since 2019. I dug the footers myself. And Marilyn, who was just a woman at a desk in Harrisburg, said, "Ma'am, I'm reading a recorded deed. Do you want the grantee name?" I said yes. She said, "Kalen D. Ickes." I got up. I don't know why. I got up and stood in my own kitchen on 2 crutches like standing was going to fix it. Then I reached across the island for the first piece of paper I could find, which was a lumber invoice from Katanning Supply, and I wrote the instrument number on the back of it in pencil. My hand was steady. That surprised me then, and it doesn't now. I asked her one more question. Recorded when? And Marilyn said, March 19th. I didn't call a lawyer first. I didn't call Odell. I didn't call anybody, because there was nothing to say yet. And I have never in my life been able to talk about a problem before I've seen it. The Cambria County Recorder has an online portal. It costs $2 a page. I paid $4 and I watched a progress bar, and then it was on my screen. And I want you to understand that I have looked at 4,000 recorded documents in my career, and I have never once had my hands go cold. Instrument number 2026-003-1884. Quitclaim deed. Recorded March 19, 2026, at 11:41 in the morning. Grantor. Ingrid H. Ickes. Grantee. Kalen D. Ickes. Consideration: $1. 3 and 1/10 acres. Hazel Run Road, Culver Bend Township, with the meets and bounds copied straight off my own survey. The one I paid for, the one that's in my filing cabinet in the room with the window somebody had already measured. And down at the bottom, above the notary block, in blue ink, was my signature. I zoomed in until it broke into pixels. It's good. I'll give it that. The slant is right. The capital I is right. The way the whole thing runs downhill toward the end is right. But I write a G with a broken tail. Have since trade school, because a man named Pete Sarver told me a full loop takes an extra half second, and you sign 40 things a day. The G on that deed had a nice fat loop on it, closed and round and patient. Somebody had practiced. It was a good forgery. It was a loving forgery. Those aren't the same thing, and they aren't opposites either. Here's the thing about a ventilator. It keeps a very good calendar. My discharge summary was still in the manila envelope on the counter where Odell had set it 3 days after I got home because I hadn't wanted to read about myself. Now I did. I found March 19th on the second page. Hospital Day 17. Continuous propofol. Richmond Agitation Sedation Scale, -4. -4 means you don't respond to your name. It means somebody says Ingrid, loud, right by your ear, and nothing happens. And then they press on your sternum with their knuckles and you make a face. And that face is the entire content of you that day. I could not open my eyes on March 19th. I could not hold a cup. I could not have held a pen if you'd taped it to my hand. And at 11:41 in the morning of that day, according to a flow sheet that 2 nurses initialed, I was being turned. That's what it says. Turn, R lateral, 1130. They rolled my body onto its side and packed pillows behind me so my skin wouldn't break down and rot off my hip. That was me at 11:30. 11 minutes later, 31 miles away, in a county office with a marble counter, my signature went on file and became a fact about the world. I sat at my island a long time with those 2 pieces of paper side by side, 2 nurses turning a body, a clerk stamping a deed. Same morning, same 11 o'clock hour. I did not cry, and I'm not going to pretend it was strength. I just didn't. I picked up my phone and I called my brother. I want to stop for a second because I know some of you are already ahead of me here. If you own property and you have family, go find out tonight whether your county mails a fraud alert when something gets recorded against your parcel. Most of them do it free. It took me 9 minutes back in 2019. Do it before you forget. And if this is useful to you, subscribe, because I'm going to keep telling these exactly the way they happened. I called from the company line because he hadn't blocked that, and because a man who's been ducking his sister for 2 months will still answer a number he thinks might be work. He picked up on the second ring and said, "Hey," like it was a Tuesday. I had one question ready. I'd written it on the back of the lumber invoice under the instrument number so I wouldn't wander. "Did you record a deed on my parcel?" And here's the thing that ended it for me, right there, before any of the rest. He didn't say what. He didn't say, "What deed? Ingrid, what are you talking about?" He said, Okay, let me explain. Do you know how much information is in the word, okay? He explained for 6 minutes. He explained about Tessa and the mold and the 15% off the top of every check and how the bank laughed at him, actually laughed, and how this was the last door and it had been standing open, and it wasn't going to stand open forever. He explained that he'd been in that hospital parking lot twice and couldn't make himself go in, which he offered like it was a gift, like it should have moved me. And then he said the thing. He said it calmly, and he said it like it was a reason. "You were unconscious. Someone had to decide." I let it sit. I looked at Hazel's tree through the window over my sink, and then I asked him the only follow-up there was. "Who's someone?" There was a sound on the line like he'd sat down. Then he hung up on me. Bet Corrigan practices real estate law out of a converted row house in Johnstown, and she charges $340 an hour, and there is a $9,000 photograph of a bridge in her waiting room that I stared at while I decided how much of my life I was about to spend. Retainer was 5,000. She read the deed for 4 minutes without saying anything, and then she took her glasses off. Which I've learned is what people do right before they tell you the truth. She said 3 things. First, quiet title. That's a lawsuit that asks a judge to look at a chain of ownership and say out loud who owns something. Second, lis pendens. That's a single line you file against a parcel that says litigation is pending, and it doesn't stop a sale, it does something better. It makes the property radioactive to every lender in North America. Third, the notary journal. In Pennsylvania, a notary keeps a bound book, and it is a legal record, and a person whose name appears in it has a right to request the entry. I wrote all 3 down on the back of the same lumber invoice, which by then looked like a ransom note. Then Bet put her glasses back on and gave me the last thing, which she didn't have to. She said, "Ingrid, I want you to hear this clearly before you pay me $1. If this goes where I think it goes, you are going to be suing your mother." She asked if I wanted to think about it. I'd had 31 days of nothing but ceiling tile. I was done thinking. I said, "Send me the engagement letter." I signed it with my own hand. The G came out broken, the way it always does. There was still a hole in it, and the hole was the postcard. I'd signed up for the county's fraud alert in 2019 specifically so that this exact thing could not happen to me twice. So on May 12th, I called the recorder's office and a woman named Deb pulled it up while I waited, and she said cheerfully that the notice had gone out. March 20th. Next business day, just like it's supposed to. I asked her where it went. She read me the address on file. 1140 Sycamore Street, my mother's kitchen. I want you to hear this part clearly, because people have asked me why I didn't see it coming. I did see it coming. I saw it coming in 2016 when my father sold 6 acres out from under his own mother's name and told me afterward. So I built a smoke detector. And in March, while I was asleep, somebody took it down and put it in her purse. Because on March 5th, which was hospital day 2, which was 3 days into the sedation, a temporary change of address was filed with the Postal Service in my name, filed by a person identifying as the family caregiver of an incapacitated adult. That is not a forgery. That is a form. It has a box you check and no signature from the patient because the entire point of it is that the patient can't sign because the patient is on a ventilator. I have never been angrier at a piece of paper that was working correctly. The alarm went off. It rang in her kitchen, and somebody stood there and listened to it ring and then threw it away, and then drove to a title office 14 days later. Bet sent the journal request on the 13th. Keystone Title and Insurance in Ebensburg took 9 days to answer it, which she said was 8 days longer than an office answers when it has nothing to worry about. It came back as a photocopy of a single page from a bound book with a green cloth spine, and I have it in a fireproof box now, and I could draw it from memory. Entry number 1102, March 19th, 2026, 11:38 in the morning. Document type, in ballpoint, in a careful hand. Quit claim deed. Signer, Ingrid H. Ickes. Method of identification. And this is the column that did it, because there's a checkbox for driver's license and a checkbox for passport and a blank line for other, and none of those were used. Instead, somebody had checked the box that says personally known to notary. Personally known. And then, in the last column, the one that the title offices around here started using after the deed fraud stories a few years back, the column that most people have never seen in their lives, there was a thumbprint. Black ink. A full one. Not a smudge, not a partial. Somebody had pressed down hard and rolled it, the way you're supposed to. I sat there and I heard my mother's voice in my kitchen saying, "Kaylin needs a home. You just need a roof." And I looked at that little inked square. I have narrow hands. I've had them shut indoors and hit with hammers, and I have looked at them every day of my working life. I know what my own thumb looks like. That wasn't it. You can order your own medical records. People don't know that, or they know it and assume it's a fight. It isn't. You fill out a form for the Health Information Management Department, you pay a per-page fee, And about 2 weeks later, a box shows up. Mine cost $58 and came to 214 pages, certified, with a raised seal on the cover letter, which is the part that matters, because a certified record is a record a court will look at without arguing about it first. I went through all 214 at my kitchen island over 2 nights. Ventilator flow sheet, March 19th, entries every 2 hours, tidal volume and rate and pressure, hour after hour after hour. Sedation record, propofol at 40 micrograms per kilogram per minute, continuous, no interruption logged that day. Turn log, 11:30, right lateral, 2 sets of initials, neurochecks, RASS, -4 at 8, at 10, at noon, at 2. Somewhere around page 60 I stopped thinking of it as my family's mistake. That's the honest timestamp. Not the deed. Not the phone call. Page 60, at my own kitchen island, at 1 in the morning, reading a nurse's initials next to the word unresponsive for the 9th consecutive time. Because a mistake is something you make. This had a schedule. I made 3 copies. One for Bet. One I didn't know what for yet. And one I put in the bottom of my job box under the impact driver, which is not a rational place to keep medical records, but it was the place in my life that had never once been touched by anybody but me. My father came on the 17th, and he didn't knock. He came right up the steps and through the door the way you do at a place you used to own, which he never has. But his mother did, and in his mind that's the same arithmetic. He was 64, and he looked 80 from the side. He didn't apologize. He didn't ask about the crutches, which by then were down to 1 cane. He stood in the middle of the floor I laid, and he talked about 1974, and about his father, and about how there used to be a pump house at the bottom of the run, and I let him, because I wanted to see where he was going. He got there. He said the 2016 sale was men's business in the family and that I'd made it ugly by looking it up. He said family handles family, and I went and got a lawyer, and that's what strangers do. And then he told me the truth, which I don't think he meant to, and which I have thought about more than anything else anybody said that whole spring. He said, "If your brother's up here, then the land came back to us." He looked out my window at his mother's apple tree. "If it's just you, then I'm the man who sold his mother's ground." He didn't want money. My father has never wanted money in his life. He wanted the story to end a different way. I said, "Dad, the land did come back. I bought it." And he shook his head slow, like I'd said something a child says. "You bought it at a tax sale," he said. "That's not the same thing." Then he walked out and left the door open behind him. Odell came by that same week with a file folder, and inside it was my company. 8 weeks of it. Every invoice, every change order, every payroll run, the Dunlap job closed out and signed off, a retaining wall in Portage that came in 400 under, and the whole thing in his terrible block printing. He'd run Icky's Build and Restore for 2 months and had not paid himself $1 over his foreman rate. When I asked him why not, he looked at me like I'd asked why he wears boots. And the crew, 6 guys, had gone and rearranged their own shifts so nobody got laid off in April, which is not a thing crews do, and Odell hadn't asked them to. He never mentioned any of it. He mentioned the retaining wall twice, and then I asked him about the parking lot, because Junie had told me something in the hall on my last day. He shrugged and said the morning shift starts at 6 and it's 29 miles back to his place, and it seemed dumb to drive it. 9 nights. He slept in his truck in a hospital parking lot 9 nights so he could sit in a chair beside a person who did not know he was there. I said thank you, and it came out wrong. Too small, and he waved it off and said the only thing he said about it in his whole life. "You'd have sat in mine?" I stopped calling them my family somewhere in there. Not out loud, not in a speech. Just in the part of my head that keeps the books. The way you quietly move a line item from one column to another because it was in the wrong column the whole time. Keystone Title and Insurance sits between a hearing aid place and a shuttered Rite Aid on Center Street in Ebensburg. Cheryl Vance has worked there 19 years. She's 47. She's been my mother's friend since they were 17, and her son Denny has framed houses for my father since 2014. And there were 2 winters when my father had no work at all and paid Denny anyway out of his own pocket. And everybody in 3 townships knows that story because Cheryl tells it. I walked in on a Monday with my cane, and she knew me before the door shut. She said my name with real warmth. She asked about the pelvis. She was the first person in my family's entire orbit to ask about the pelvis. I put a piece of paper on her counter, face up, the photocopy of entry 1102, and I asked her one question, and I did not raise my voice, because there were 2 other people in that office, and I didn't need them yet. Was I standing here on March 19th? She looked at the page for a long time. She said, "Ingrid, honey, I have known your family since before you were born." I said, "That's not what I asked." She picked the page up to hand it back to me, and her hands were shaking so badly the paper made a sound. She never answered me. That's the whole thing. She never said yes, and she never said no, and a notary who won't say whether somebody stood in front of her has already testified. I got to the door and she said my name. "Ingrid, don't do this to your mother." I said, "I'm not doing anything to her. I'm doing it to a document." And I left. There was a tote of my things in my parents' basement, winter tools and my grandmother's canning jars, and on the 18th I went and got it, with Odell driving, because I wasn't going to that house alone, and I wasn't going to pretend that was cowardice. Nobody was home. My mother has kept a key under the same flower pot since 1998. I got the tote. And on my way back through the kitchen, I saw the mail on the table, the way you see mail, without meaning to. And underneath a rubber-banded stack of grocery circulars, there was an envelope from a law firm in Pittsburgh with a February date on it. I should not have read it. I read it. It was a demand letter. And clipped behind it was a photocopy of a personal guarantee, signed in 2021 in my mother's real handwriting, $61,000. Behind that was a piece of notebook paper where she had written down her monthly Social Security check and subtracted from it, over and over, in different combinations, 11 times, looking for an arrangement of those numbers that ended somewhere other than where it ends. Some of the columns had been erased so hard the paper had gone soft. I sat down in her kitchen chair. I sat there maybe 3 minutes with Odell's truck idling in the driveway, and I understood her completely. I want to be clear about that, because it would be easier for me if I hadn't. She wasn't greedy. She was drowning, and she'd been drowning since 2021, and nobody had thrown her anything. And then I remembered that she'd had 31 days to drive 31 miles and tell me, "A drowning person will climb you. That's not a mystery. You're still allowed to swim away." On May 19th, I drove myself for the first time since the 3rd of March. 31 miles, automatic transmission, right leg fine, both hands on the wheel like a student driver. The Cambria County District Attorney has 2 detectives assigned to real estate fraud, which surprised me until Detective Rob Halloran told me it's the fastest growing thing they've got, and most of it is somebody's own kid. He's a big, quiet man with a coffee mug that says, "World's okayest golfer." I laid it out on his desk in the order I'd have laid out a bid. Certified copy of the recorded deed. Photocopy of notary journal entry, 1102. Thumbprint and all. 214 certified pages with a raised seal. The USPS change of address confirmation. And 14 photographs, including one of a strip of blue painter's tape on a poplar window casing with the numbers 84 by 63 written on it in pencil. He read for 20 minutes without saying anything at all. Then he squared the stack, and he looked up, and he asked me the question I'd already asked myself at 2 in the morning for a week. "Ma'am, do you understand that your mother is likely a subject in this?" I said yes. He waited to see if I'd add anything to it. I didn't, because I'd done the math on that at page 60, and there wasn't a second answer hiding behind the first one. I didn't come there to hurt anybody. I came because somebody put my name on a piece of paper while a machine was breathing for me. He gave me a card and a number, 264471, and then, at the door, he said, "We'll need that thumbprint." I said, "It's in the book." My brother is not stupid and he found out fast, because Cheryl Vance called my mother the same afternoon I walked out of that title office, and by that weekend Kaylin was calling me from numbers I didn't recognize. 17 voicemails in 9 days. I saved every one. The first 4 were pleading and I could barely listen to them, honestly, because he sounded like he was 9. Then they turned. Around the 6th one he stopped talking to me and started talking about me, to whoever might hear it. Which is a thing people do when they're building a version of events they intend to use. He said ICU delirium. He said it 4 separate times. He said sedation does things to people's memory and everybody knows that. He told our cousin Ray that I didn't remember signing, that I'd been out of it for weeks, that I was confused and it was sad, honestly, and we should all be gentle with Ingrid. Ray texted me and asked, very kindly, whether I was doing okay, really okay, and it took me a full day to understand what I was being asked. And in the last message, the 17th, at 11 at night, with his voice cracked all the way through and something like fear in it for the first time, my brother said it again. You were unconscious. Someone had to decide. He kept saying it like it was a defense. Think about that for 1 second. Every single time he said that sentence, he was telling the world I hadn't signed anything. He built his whole shelter out of the one board that was going to fall on him. I forwarded all 17 to Detective Halloran and I went to bed. One thing, while we're here, if somebody in your life has ever told you that you don't remember something you are certain you remember, write it down tonight. Just write it and date it. That's all it takes. It costs nothing, and it changes everything later, and I promise you nobody has ever regretted it. And if this story is landing somewhere real for you, leave me a comment. I read them. That isn't a line. I actually read them. On May 22nd, Bet Corrigan filed 2 documents. The first was a complaint to Quiet Title, Ickies versus Ickies, which is a sentence I never expected to see with a case number after it. The second was 1 line. A lis pendens on Parcel 41 Hazel Run Road, Culver Bend Township, recorded at the same counter where the deed had been recorded 64 days earlier, by the same office, into the same book. Bet explained what it meant while I wrote the check, and she put it in a way I've never gotten out of my head. She said, as of this afternoon, there is not a bank on earth that will lend $1 against that dirt. $14,200, all in, and I paid it out of the money I'd been saving to re-roof the shop. Then I drove home and sat on my porch and looked at Hazel's apple tree, which had not fruited in 7 years, and I thought about how strange it is that the biggest thing I ever did in my life was a line of text in a county book that nobody I'm related to would ever read. My mother thought I was sulking. My brother thought I was confused. My father thought I'd gone and gotten a lawyer. Singular, like it was a tantrum with a retainer. They were all still waiting for me to yell. That's what they were braced for. Every one of them had a speech ready for the day Ingrid finally blew up, and they'd have known exactly what to do with that. Nobody had a speech ready for a filing date. It's a line of text on a county record. It is also a wall. Halloran called me on the 26th. They'd rolled my prints on the 20th, all 10, on a glass plate at the county building, which is a strange thing to do at 34, when you have never had so much as a speeding ticket. He said the comparison came back on the thumbprint in entry 1102. He said it slow, the way you say something you want somebody to hear only once. It is not mine. I said okay. I said it, and then I sat down on my own steps, because there is a difference between knowing a thing and having a man with a badge say it into a phone. I asked him whose it was. He said, "Ma'am, that's an active investigation," which is what he's supposed to say, and I respected it, and I didn't push. And then, right before he hung up, he asked me a question that had nothing to do with anything he'd just told me. He said, "Is your brother left-handed?" I sat on those steps for a while after that call. Kaylin has been left-handed since he was 4 years old, and my father tried for 1 entire summer to fix it, with a fielder's glove and a lot of yelling, and failed. I never answered Halloran's question. I didn't have to. He hadn't asked it to find out. He'd asked it the way you set a beam in place, and then step back and let somebody else see that it's plumb. So now I knew two things, and they were two different people. Somebody's hand had made that signature, and somebody else's hand had gone down flat on that book. The invitation came on the 27th to my own mailbox, which had been mine again since the 8th, because that was the first thing I fixed. Heavy cream stock, gold border, the kind you buy in a box of 50 at a craft store and print at the drugstore. On the envelope, in my mother's handwriting, the same handwriting that has been on every birthday card of my life, Ingrid and Guest. Inside, Kaylin and Tessa, May 30th, 6 o'clock. Culver Bend Volunteer Fire Hall. And down in the corner, in italic, please join us. We have news. Odell was standing in my kitchen when I opened it. He read it upside down the way he reads everything, and he said, "You're not going." I said, "I'm going." He said, "Ingrid." And I said, "Odell, they mailed it." They sat down and addressed it and licked the stamp. They still think there's going to be a closing. That's what got me. Not the nerve, the confidence. They mailed me an invitation to the party where they were going to announce my house, and they were so sure of the outcome that they included a guest. So on the 28th, I drove to the store in Ebensburg, and I walked down the toy aisle with my cane, and I found it. Polyester. Castle-shaped. Little printed drawbridge. $19. Exactly as advertised. 4.2 stars. I bought it. I took it home, and I wrapped it myself in silver paper, and I put a red bow on it. And I sat there at my island looking at that box for probably 10 minutes. I'm not proud of how good that felt. But I'm not going to lie about it either. The Culver Bend Volunteer Fire Hall is where this town does everything. You get married in it, and you get buried out of it, and you vote in it, and every October you eat a lot of bad chicken in it for the ambulance fund. Vinyl floor. Folding tables with paper cloths. String lights somebody staples to the rafters for every occasion, including funerals, because they're already up there. About 60 people that night, which in a town of 2,100 is most of the ones who matter. I came in the side door at 10 after 6 with my cane, in a clean work shirt, because I don't own anything else, and because I wasn't going to buy a dress to attend this. The room hitched. Half a second, the way a room does. Then it went back to itself. My mother saw me and lit up like a marquee and started toward me and then thought better of it. My father did not look at me one time the entire evening, and I mean that literally. I watched. And then, Tessa Hoyt came across that floor at me at 6 months pregnant with both hands out and hugged me so hard my cane went sideways, and said she was so glad she'd told Kaylin I'd come. She meant it. That's the thing that made it hard to breathe in there. She meant every word. I hugged her back, and I set my silver box on the gift table between a crock pot and a card. And then I looked across the room, and I saw a man in a jacket standing by himself near the coat rack. Not drinking, not talking, not smiling. Wendell Hoyt. Her father. The loan officer at Allegheny First Savings. He looked like he'd come from a viewing. At 7, Kaylin tapped a plastic champagne flute with a butter knife, which doesn't ring, so he had to do it 4 times, and somebody finally killed the music. He was good. I'll say that. He talked about Tessa, and he talked about the baby, and he said it had been a hard year for the Ickes family, and a few people said amen. And I watched my mother across the room press a napkin under both eyes. Then he set the glass down, and he said, "And we've got one more thing." He got a grin on. On June 15th, we're closing on the family homestead up on Hazel Run. That room came apart. Applause, real applause, a whoop from the back. Somebody by the beer buckets yelled, "About time that land came back." My father nodded, slow, twice, and it was the only time all night I saw his face do anything. My mother stood up. She had a flute in her hand and her eyes were wet, and she was so happy. And she turned toward my end of the room, and she raised it at me, and she said it loud enough for 3 tables, loud enough that the people who didn't hear it got told what it was in about 4 seconds. Kaylin needs a home. She smiled at me, warm, proud, like she was giving me a compliment in front of the whole town. Ingrid just needs a roof. And the room laughed. That's the part. 60 people laughed, and a man I've framed 2 houses with reached over and squeezed my shoulder like he was congratulating me on being such a good sport about it. I set my glass down on the paper tablecloth, and I stood up. I didn't have a microphone and I didn't want one. I set it at the volume you'd use to read somebody a price. Congratulations, Tessa. Truly. And she beamed at me, and half the room turned around to see who was being nice. And then, in the exact same voice, I said, "There's no closing." There was a laugh. A confused, generous, small-town laugh. The kind you give somebody whose joke you didn't quite catch. I let it finish. Then I said the rest. Slowly. Because I've spent 12 years explaining permits to people who don't want to hear about permits, and I have learned that the trick is to be boring. I said there's a lease pendens filed against Parcel 41 Hazel Run Road, recorded May 22nd at the Cambria County Recorder's Office. I said the case name, Ickes versus Ickes. I said the number. I said it the way you read a part number off a box. Kalen laughed out loud and said, "She's making that up." And there was a beat where the room genuinely could have gone his way, because I'm the one who was in the hospital and everyone knew it and everyone had heard something about sedation by then. I didn't argue with him. Arguing was what they were all braced for. Instead, I turned my head about 15 degrees, and I looked at the man standing by the coat rack, and I said, "Mr. Hoyt, do you want to tell them, or should I?" And 60 people turned around at once. Wendell Hoyt stood there with everybody's eyes on him and his daughter's hand still in his son-in-law's. And he was gray, and he had known since 8:40 that morning, and he had come to this party anyway because Tessa had asked him to, and he loved her. He said, "The loan was pulled this morning." His voice didn't do what he wanted it to. 8:40. There's a cloud on the title. Somebody's fork hit a plate, and Tessa let go of my brother's hand. My mother came up out of her chair so fast she took it over backward, and a folding chair going down on a vinyl floor is the loudest thing in the world. And then she screamed at me, in front of 60 people, 61 years old, in her good blouse, with a napkin still in her fist. She said, "I always have to win." She said, "I've always had to be the one who's right, since I was a little girl, and everybody in this town knows it." She said, "I brought a lawyer into a family." She said the word lawyer like it was a disease you catch in a city. She said I was humiliating my brother in front of everyone he knows, on his night, with his pregnant fiancée standing right there. And did I have any idea what kind of person that made me? She called me a liar twice. Her voice broke on the second one. My father got up and took her arm, and she tore it away from him so hard he stumbled into the table. And I stood there. That's all. I stood there with both hands on the head of a cane, and I did not move 1 foot, and I did not interrupt her until she was finished, because she wasn't going to be finished until she was, and because a room can only hold that for so long before it starts doing math. I watched 60 faces do the math. Then I waited 3 more seconds. And I asked her, in the same voice I'd used on Tessa, the same voice I use for a change order, the question I'd been carrying since the 6th of May. I was on a ventilator for 21 days. Somebody in the back said, "Oh God," very quietly. "Which one of you held the pen?" Nobody answered.